Welcome back to the Fanspeak Network and another episode of Sibling Showdown, our strategy edition. This week, we are talking about the NFL schedule release and which teams we like their entire playoff schedules. Because, Steve, some of them you'll find one or two you like, but then one or two are meh. And then there's some where you just don't really love. You may love the team, but you don't love the playoff schedule. We have like 10 to 12 where we really like the whole playoff schedule. So Steve, how are you doing today? What did you think about the NFL schedule release? What was your biggest takeaway before we go team by team with some of our favorites?
Yeah, I mean, overall, it's good that we finally have this data. I mean, we
Yeah.
knew what teams are playing, but now we know which teams are in the playoffs. We also prioritize it for us knowing to spread out our buys to make sure we're not getting, any zeros is always important for your overall success and advance rate. But like you said, we looked at like 10 to 12 teams that look like they have pretty good situations between where they're playing, weather-wise, and the matchups that they have. So yeah, I think we're excited now that we can draft with this knowledge, and it's not going to be the be-all end-all, but it is important to finally have this data.
Yeah, and I think there's three main factors we're looking at. Now, first of all, we're fully aware that, 7 months ahead of time, we cannot project certain things. Like, last year there were teams that just fell off the, wagon because obviously due to injuries and stuff like that. So we don't know, we're not going to know, maybe a defensive matchup becomes harder or easier because of injuries. Maybe obviously a team could just totally fall apart because of likely injuries or just major lower expectations. And then it's just like the end of the season is a disaster. That kind of happened with the Saints last year and a couple other teams, the Saints, the Browns, those type of teams, they didn't provide good playoff atmospheres because the team was a total disaster at the end of the year. So we can't totally there's some teams where you could kind of hypothesize that, like the Browns again, but there's not teams that, you can't fully predict that. So the factors we're looking at, of course, are obviously first and foremost, like, what is the conditions? Is it a dome? Is it in Florida or like San Francisco, or is it in a cold weather situation? Obviously we do like those games in Florida or California or a dome. That kind of feels a little better. Sure, it could rain in some of the outdoor places, but that's nice. So kind of the weather conditions, number one. Number two, is it going to be a potential back and forth, or could one team just dominate and, there's a potential for starters not playing fourth quarter? That would not be ideal. We want some kind of back and forth, potentially close spread, high total, and we know well out projected high totals and spreads or tight spreads, high totals, but like obviously it will matter that week. But projecting that now, we can hypothesize as to what would be the close spread, high totals, potentially that back and forth shootout that we so desperately want. And then third, what's the defensive matchup? I have to say personally, I do not have a strong interest in my team meaning the team that I'm stacking up, going against the Eagles or the Chiefs or, teams like that. Denver, is such a good defense now. So talk about that a little bit, and then we'll go team by team.
Yeah, and both things can change. Offensive situations can fully change due to injury. Even if some of the stars are still there, Texans being a great example last year, the Texans-Ravens game, everyone was circling, but the Texans' offensive line was a complete mess. And then, of course, losing Diggs and Tank Dell. It is very easy for a good defense like the Ravens to take Nico out of the game, and Stroud was harassed the entire game, did nothing. So it's those situations, but also sometimes it's the defense that maybe didn't look good on paper, but they really turned it on, or did look good on paper and then they fell apart. So we're doing it with the best data we have right now. Things will absolutely change, and this is why, of course, with volume, you're spreading out exposures. You're not focused on just one game. And why we also prioritize week 15 and 16 as well, because particularly in some of these larger tournaments like BBM and the puppies that are 1-10 or more for the earlier rounds, it's hard to get there. So if you get that little edge correlation in that week, that could help you get through. So that is something that's why we look at the whole playoff schedule, not just only focus on week 17.
No, that's a great point. Certainly, and certainly, like playoff correlations in general, we use as tiebreakers. We don't over hyper focus, and we definitely give weight into the entire playoff picture. Also, I personally am going to do much more sprint than I am BBM, and so therefore, you have 3 playoff weeks. So these teams we're mentioning tonight are teams that we like, kind of their whole entire playoff picture. Like a team like the Packers, I don't like their playoff picture. That would be a team I'd probably shy away from a little bit in the sprint format. Maybe they pop off one week, but do I feel confident under the conditions, the types of teams they're playing, that they're going to pop off highest totals 3 weeks in a row? Not really. So that's a team I might not have as much in the sprint. So again, it's how you apply it to the different types of contests. Obviously, like you said, BBM, large field type stuff, smaller field type stuff, sprint, different formats also matter as well. So now let's just talk our favorite. We're each going to do 3, our 6 favorite teams that we want to stack up, that we like their playoff schedules. We're each going to do 3. We're going to go back and forth. Then we'll give some honorable mentions. Steve, I'll let you go first.
I'm going to go and are you pulling up the schedules?
No, I wasn't. Oh, yes. So sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I pulled up. Yes. Our guy, Sean Mitchell on Twitter, follow him at Mitchell17. He did a great chart, charting out with the buys, and then obviously week 15, 16, 17. So yes, I apologize for that. I thought you meant like on NFL.com, and then I totally forgot this. So yes, thank you to Sean Mitchell. Check him out on Twitter. I'm sure I'm going to be on his channel next week. And I know he will be on the Fanspeak Network this summer, hopefully multiple times. So check out Sean Mitchell, and we appreciate his Twitter chart here. So yes, go ahead. What is your first team, Steve?
So my first team is going to be the Los Angeles Rams. This is not one that I've heard a lot of buzz about, but I like it. I like it from the perspective of we know the offense that they have, the potential they have with Stafford, Puka, Kyron, and Devontae, great offensive coach. And then you look at the schedule, Detroit and at Atlanta, both in domes, and then at Seattle. Seattle maybe a little rain, but shouldn't be a major weather concern. That's also a divisional matchup, so the chance that, and these were the top, 2 teams last year in the division, the chance that these teams are, tanking, like not playing their starters, or it's a blowout, are kind of low. But the other reason I like it is really good defenses. Detroit are really good defensive matchups. Detroit's defense last year was really bad. They were banged up, and they added a few pieces this offseason, but I still think it's the weak point of that team. And of course, since Detroit scores so many points, typically there's just massive shootout potential here. Seattle, same sort of thing. Like their defense is okay, but not a huge threat. And I think their offense is really improved, so that could be a shootout. And then finally, at Atlanta, they've one of the best kind of skill cores there is, with Bijan, London, Mooney. Penix could have a breakout, and Zach Robinson actually comes from the Rams coaching tree, Sean McVay. So, we saw last year, even with DeAndre Cousins' injury, this was an offense that had some potency. So I just really feel like you do run the potential of 3 potential shootouts. You have some great guys to stack on your team to begin with, and then if you want to pull pieces from any or all those 3 teams, you can at different various points in the draft. So it's just a fun team that you can really stack in a fun way without being too expensive, because even if you get the early pieces of that Rams Atlanta game in the first 2 or 3 rounds, their quarterbacks go late. So it's a great, easy, cheap stack. So that's my first one.
Okay. I like the Rams a lot. And again, for all the reasons you just mentioned, it's got kind of checks all the boxes of the game environments, 2 dome games, and, matchups and everything like that. Really big potential back and forth in all 3 games, in my opinion. So definitely agree with you there. Okay. My first one, sticking in the same division, NFC West, I'm going to go San Francisco 49ers. We know the wheels came off the wagon because everything that could have potentially went wrong for them went wrong last year. So obviously this year, if they can stay healthy, they're going to compete in this division. They have one of the easier schedules, by the way, just full entire schedules. And then you look at their playoff schedule. Week 15, home Tennessee. Week 16, at Indy, obviously in a dome. Week 17, home Chicago. So again, you're either in San Francisco, hopefully you got some good weather, or in the dome in Indy. Okay, maybe they don't have like a massive like back and forth shootout, but I do think that the Tennessee and Indy, those two AFC South teams, can be competitive enough. And then Chicago is certainly one that could be competitive in a back and forth type game. Also, none of these defenses, by the way, because you kind of want that sweet spot of you want it to be back and forth, but you don't want it to be like where like the Eagles, like you're up against the Eagles, where you're like, oof, this is a really hard defense, and that's a bit daunting. So I think all three of these defenses are not going to scare you in that regard. So love that. That's 49ers is my first one. Okay, what's your second one, Steve?
And just one point I wanted to make about the 49ers, not that this is a big thing, but since everything else lines up, with them having the bye week 14, they should be healthy and ready to go starting the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really good point as well. Okay, what's your next team, Steve?
So my next one is going to be the Cincinnati Bengals. This is definitely a popular one once the schedule came out. Bengals, we saw what the potential for this offense can be last year. They got great quarterback, 2 elite receivers, good tight end, really good young running back. We know they have a bad defense, so they're always going to have to score points. And that's what they did. And they almost, had this big playoff push at the end because of that. Mm-hmm. And then you look at their schedule, you do worry a little bit about the weather in Cincinnati, but it's nowhere near the worry of, say, Cleveland.
Yeah.
So Baltimore at home, Cincinnati-Baltimore games were just fantasy gold last year.
Yeah.
At Miami, so good weather there, and then home versus Arizona. Mm-hmm. Miami and Arizona, Baltimore could have a good defense, but Cincy has always had their number. Miami should have probably one of the worst defenses, I imagine. And then Arizona could be middle of the pack, but still not a massive threat, especially against such an elite offense like Cincinnati. I think, this is a team, when they're healthy, this team competes for playoffs. No reason to think they're tanking or will be sitting guys or anything like that. Same with Miami. Look, we need Tua to be healthy for that to make sense, but Mike McDaniel, Tua, when healthy, that offense produces. Arizona, Kyler and company, they can produce a little bit. So all three of these games, especially against Cincinnati's bad defense, could be fairly high scoring, especially at Miami. Miami plays better at home late in the season. So, I just think we have a situation where the Bengals are going to have to score 35 every week. So I like it when the matchups kind of work in that favor as well.
Absolutely. Definitely circled Cincinnati as a target. I mean, obviously they're a team we want to target. Bad defense, amazing offense. We want to target them in general, but yes, definitely agree with you. Like the playoff schedule there. My second one is a team similar. We want to target them anyways. Just happen to also like their playoff schedule. That's the Detroit Lions. Week 8 bye. You mentioned the Rams already. At LA Rams, home against the Steelers, at Minnesota. So you've got 3 games on a dome. 2 are away, but both dome games and 1 at home. So you got 3 dome games. Check. Love that. Now, none of the defense, Minnesota and Pittsburgh, even Rams, the defenses are decent, but it's still, I think, can be a back and forth nature. And the great thing about the Lions, from what we saw last year, and yes, I know new offensive coordinator, is doesn't matter if there's not as much pushback. They just, they bite your kneecaps and they're going to just score as many points as possible. That's the Dan Campbell way. So Lions are one I'm targeting, mainly leaning into the 3 dome games there, and what this offense can do, but don't mind the potential back and forth, especially at Minnesota week 17. That could be fireworks.
Yeah. We saw it last year. Minnesota actually had like a top 5 defense. Didn't matter to the Lions. Didn't matter one bit. Those were 2 very high-scoring games for the Lions, including the game that mattered for playoff seed and everything. So that one just went totally Jahmyr Gibbs. But we know the Lions can score in droves. We know they have the games where everyone gets involved. We know they have the games where one guy just kind of goes off, 1 or 2 guys just go off. But even with the offense coordinator change, pretty much every other piece comes back. So that's why it's hard to say anything negative about the Lions.
All right, your last one.
My last one is Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They don't have the dome games, but they're home versus Atlanta, at Carolina, and at Miami. First, with
to
Atlanta,
Florida. Yeah.
two in Florida and at Carolina,
Yeah.
Carolina gets any snow in December, it's like half an inch. I'm not
Right.
worried about that.
Yeah.
But also the first two games are divisional. So those games are going to matter a lot for making sure they win the division, playoff seeding, things of that nature. No reason that I'm thinking that they aren't going to produce in those games. And Atlanta this past year, Tampa Atlanta games were pretty good shootouts. The second Carolina game, which was I think week 17 this past year, Tampa put up 38 points or whatever it was. It was just a massive score. And at Miami, as I mentioned before, if Tua is playing, that's the one caveat. But Miami's defense, I think, is one of the worst. High pace with Mike McDaniel, and just in general, this might be the best defensive schedule. Atlanta's defense should be pretty bad. Carolina's defense was like worse in the league last year. They made a few upgrades, but probably nothing major. And Miami, I think, is going to be a real struggle this year. So this might be the best defensive matchup out there. And Tampa, similar to Detroit, there's an offense coordinator change, but they promoted from within. Every other piece is back: O-line, quarterback, receivers, and not only that, they're back healthy. And then they added a piece like Emeka and Buka. So this offense could be one of the top ones in the league and against maybe the easiest defensive matchups you have.
Absolutely. All right. My final one is the week 17 matchup with the Detroit Lions, and that's the Minnesota Vikings. So Minnesota Vikings, we have 2 out of 3 in the Dome, at Dallas Dome, at Giants, not in the Dome, but New York, but it's not Buffalo. New York or Jersey, I should say, but it's not Buffalo weather, or at least. And then again, home against Detroit. So 2 Dome games, and this is one where none of the defenses. No, it's not like the easiest defensive schedule, but none of the defenses terrify you, or scare you. And all of them, and I even think Giants could be sneaky fun this year. But even if you want to say 2 out of 3 could be absolute shootouts, Dallas Vikings, Detroit Vikings, absolute could be the back and forth, close spread, high total we're looking for. And who knows, if Cam Scatterboo does what we hope, maybe the Giants are friskier this year for sure too. So I really like that schedule for the Vikings as well. And, I have to say, while we picked 6 total, and let me read them again, Steve's was LA Rams, Cincinnati Bengals, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Mine was San Francisco 49ers, Detroit Lions, and Minnesota Vikings. There are other clear ones that have, some have like 2 out of 3 dome games. I think Houston has 3 dome games. So Arizona Cardinals, 2 out of 3 dome games, and all potential close, high scoring games, in my opinion, at Houston, Atlanta, at Cincinnati. Atlanta Falcons, another one we talked about here, their defense we want to attack. Well, hopefully they're a back and forth shootout we want to attack, because you mentioned 2 of the other ones, at Tampa Bay and LA Rams, and then week 16 at Arizona, who I just mentioned. So here's our honorable mentions: as Arizona Cardinals, Atlanta Falcons. I just read their schedules. Then Houston, all dome games, home against Arizona, home against the Raiders, at the Chargers. Again, potential, some back and forth high totals, and all 3 dome games. I love that. And then I'll just give 2 more. Dallas Cowboys, home against Minnesota, at the Chargers, at Washington. So 2 dome games. And again, all have the potential for some back and forth, which we love. And then finally, the mentioned Chargers. We've got at Kansas City, don't love that. But at Dallas and home against Houston, those were the 2 of the teams we've mentioned recently. I like that. So thoughts on some of those honorable mention teams, Steve?
Yeah, no, I think the honorable mentions are very interesting. And, a team like Atlanta, especially, just because I think they're going to have to, with their likely bad defense, they're like a poor man's Bengals, where they're going to have to be thrown a lot, have to score a lot of points if they're going to win any game. So, or many games. So I like the shootout potential, especially against teams like the Bucs and the Rams for them.
Yeah. I'd say I'll do the flip side really quick as a fun thing to end the show. One of the teams that I would call a good team that I like their offense, but don't love their playoff schedule, for me, is the Packers. I mean, of course, there's teams where I don't have a lot of desire in, like Cleveland Browns at Chicago and then home against Buffalo and Pittsburgh. That's terrible. And they're going to be terrible. So hate the Browns. Again, if you're doing volume, you want to get access to, all the playoff week games and stuff like that. But that's one I'm not going to have much Browns exposure in general. And I certainly won't because of playoff schedule, because it's disgusting. But as far as a good offense with not a great playoff schedule, it's the Packers for me. That's at Denver, at Chicago, and then home against Baltimore in Green Bay. Not setting up for a good weather potential situation at really any of those three locations. And then, you're going against the Denver defense to kick it off. That's really rough. So thoughts on any teams for you that's like the inverse, where it's like, wow, I like this team, but I do not like their playoff schedule.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we don't really like the Browns anyways, but that one's just so tough. It just adds more fuel to the fire. Like, for instance, like the Bills have a really tough Week 17 matchup with Philly, and weather isn't
in
great.
Buffalo,
and weather isn't great for potentially any of those three games. But at least New England and Cleveland should be able to be high scoring. There's some blowout risk, but that's not as bad as what I agree with you. The Packers is probably the worst. Chicago, even if that's even if Chicago defense is improved, at least that's a divisional game. But yeah, at Denver, that's going to be super tough. And then Baltimore, that defense really came on as the season went on last year. So it's definitely not my favorite defense to play. And at least the Bengals know them. And for the Bengals, that is just a divisional game that they have consistently seen, and Burrow and Lamar matchups have been epic throughout the years.
Oh yeah. I mean, I swear Burrow and Chase, like their Chase touchdowns against the Ravens is just insane. I mean, he's a Ravens killer for sure. All right, Steve, let's round this out. This has been fun. Again, we, are going to try to get exposure. We don't overdo it. We don't that's not the first priority when we're drafting, but we do consider it. Definitely use it as tiebreakers. There are these, 10 to 12 teams that we really do like their playoff schedule. We'll apply it to these classic contests, but these are things I'll lean extra into a sprint. What are your final thoughts on these playoff schedules?
I think you nailed it. Like it really, looking at the whole picture matters a lot for the sprint, because look, if there's one bad week, you can still have a pretty good score overall for your guys. But if it's one bad week, you could be out in the playoff structure of like a BBM. So it's not just Week 17. If your guys have a really bad Week 15 or Week 16, you just might not get to the finals. So that's just something to always keep in mind. And that's one real big benefit about the sprint, that you're still alive for at least a decent cash, even if you do have a bad week, say Week 15.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll see a lot of sprint drafts on Sibling Showdown on Thursdays. This has been fun. We hope this has been helpful for you. Be sure to like this episode. Be sure you're subscribed, notification bell on for the Fanspeak Network. We have live drafts, some fun things like Jeopardy, Best Ball Jeopardy, during every single weekday, and then strategy shows like this uploaded throughout the week. So we hope you found this helpful. This has been certainly helpful for me, Steve. So for Steve, I'm Meg, and we will see you next time.